The night wind moves through the New Hampshire woods with a quiet that feels older than the trees themselves. A quiet that seems to breathe with the weight of things left unsaid. Along those frozen roads, an unsolved mystery settled into the landscape like frost on abandoned glass. A young student disappeared after a crash that should have been ordinary, leaving only a cold case and a trail of unanswered shadows. As the silence thickened around her name, the story of Maura Murray became more than a disappearance. It became a reminder of how easily a life can slip into darkness without leaving a single scream behind. Tonight, we reopen that sealed door and trace the final footsteps she took into the winter night. The winter forests of New England often look peaceful from a distance, yet that peace feels brittle when you stand among the trees. The air carries a cold that settles into bone rather than skin, and every narrow road winds like a hidden intention, curling deeper into darkness. Locals say that on certain nights, you can hear the difference between truth and deception by the way the wind moves across the branches. This landscape has always shaped the quiet villages scattered across it, and Haverhill, New Hampshire, is no exception. It is a place where isolation feels natural, where silence is not merely an absence of sound, but a presence in itself. In the depth of winter, the forest seems to press inward, as if watching everything unfold from behind its frozen veil. On nights like these, nothing feels accidental. Every shadow appears to hold its breath, and every footstep echoes a little longer than it should. It is within this uneasy stillness that the story of Maura Murray begins to form. Not as a single event, but as a gradual tightening of threads that most people never see until they snap. Maura Murray was 21 years old, standing at the edge of adulthood with a discipline forged partly by ambition and partly by necessity. She studied nursing at the University of Massachusetts, moving through her classes with a quiet focus that impressed many of her professors. She was intelligent, reserved, and committed to a future she believed she could shape with her own hands. She carried a gentle softness that drew people in, and a quiet vulnerability that made her profoundly human. Her dream of becoming a military nurse revealed a craving for structure amid inner turmoil, and perhaps a longing to escape the mounting pressures closing in around her life. As winter approached in early 2004, Maura seemed to be walking a thin line between control and collapse. Her relationship with her boyfriend had become strained by distance, suspicion, and miscommunication. He cared about her deeply, yet his protective nature sometimes drifted into a quiet intensity. Friends described him as attentive but controlling in subtle ways, always needing to know where she was or why she had not answered a call. This alone does not paint a sinister portrait, but it provides a psychological contour. Close relationships can become pressured chambers when expectations, fears, and insecurities accumulate without release. In forensic psychology, small imbalances in attachment often reveal more about a person's inner landscape than any grand dramatic gesture. Beyond him, Maura's university circle included a professor with whom she exchanged more personal conversations than typical academics require, and a roommate whose emotional instability occasionally spilled into unpredictable behavior. These individuals were not villains, but they existed within her orbit, each carrying their own shadows, their own unresolved histories, their own capacity for influence. Every crime story begins long before the crime itself. It begins with minor tensions, quiet confessions, forgotten arguments, and tiny fractures in daily life. These are the details that form psychological profiles, not by proving guilt, but by revealing the environment in which a person lives. In Maura's life, this environment felt increasingly strained, a tapestry woven with ambition, secrecy, pressure, and expectation. Her academic challenges added another layer to this weight. A small incident involving improper use of a credit card created a ripple of shame she struggled to process, combined with fatigue from long study hours and emotional stress. Maura appeared to be carrying far more than she ever admitted aloud. Those who knew her sensed she was overwhelmed, but assumed she was strong enough to handle it. Strength, however, often hides the deepest fractures. Surrounding all of this was the town of Haverhill, a place that looked calm to outsiders, but was haunted by its own buried stories. Rural communities often present tranquility on the surface, while concealing complexities beneath. Families maintain reputations through silence, neighbors maintain distance through politeness, and secrets remain unspoken because everyone agrees not to disturb the illusion of peace. In small towns, memory is long and gossip is quick, yet certain subjects fade away too easily. Haverhill had seen its own share of disappearances and violence over the decades. Events people sometimes referred to only in fragments. The woods offered both refuge and danger, and the roads that cut through them created perfect opportunities for accidents or something far worse. The psychological atmosphere of such a place matters. People adapt to isolation in ways that outsiders rarely understand. A quiet house in the middle of the forest can feel comforting one day and unsettling the next. A stranger passing through might simply be lost, or might be looking for exactly the kind of vulnerability that rural silence provides. Environments influence behavior, shaping both opportunity and impulse. Maura entered this landscape carrying a storm behind her eyes, but she walked with the appearance of control. She did not reveal everything she felt, and perhaps she did not fully understand it herself. The pressures around her gathered like snow on brittle branches, accumulating little by little, each flake insignificant until the weight became too much. People remembered Maura for her kindness and discipline, yet many sensed a quiet shift in her before she disappeared. She grew distracted and withdrawn, as if carrying an unseen weight. Emotional turmoil rarely shouts. It often nudges a person toward choices that appear irrational to anyone watching from the outside. Maura's disappearance unfolded amid personal tension, strained relationships, academic pressure, and her story reflects the quiet fractures hidden within an ordinary life. The threats she faced were subtle, not from overt danger, but from the way vulnerability quietly grows and deepens in silence. As her final days unfold, shadows deepen around Maura. The forest stays still, the town unchanged, and winding roads stretch through the cold. Yet beneath these details, an unsettling tension stirs, silent, nameless, and unavoidable, guiding her toward a path where fate lay hidden, waiting patiently in the winter darkness. The hours before Maura stepped into the darkness carried an uncanny stillness, as if the evening itself sensed the fracture that was coming. In the quiet dorm halls, fluorescent lights hummed with the kind of sterile calm that hides private storms. Maura moved through that final afternoon with a controlled precision. Yet something in her pace suggested the cracking of an inner thread long pulled too tight. A coworker from the campus security desk was the last confirmed person to see her before she disappeared. He remembered the way she sat, motionless for minutes at a time, as if staring at some internal landscape only she could see. Nothing outwardly dramatic marked those hours, but the silence around her felt sharpened, like glass dust in the air. It was a kind of fragile calm people recognize only in hindsight. Before leaving her room, Maura sent an email to her professor stating she would be gone for several days because of a family emergency. The statement had the ring of purpose, but no such emergency existed. It was a quiet falsehood dropped into a world that expected order from her. The message suggested preparation, yet it also carried the distortion of someone escaping from a pressure no one else fully understood. Then came the call. A single minute and 34 seconds. Its contents sealed behind the static anonymity of an untraceable number. No records revealing a voice, no explanation for why she answered, no clue as to whether it soothed her or tightened the knot already forming in her chest. But the timing placed it at the center of everything, like a key slipped into a lock no one could later find. When Maura left the dorm shortly after, she left behind a room that looked neither hurried nor peaceful. Certain items remained that should have traveled with her. Others were missing in a pattern that hinted at haste wrapped in intention. She walked into the February cold with the kind of determined stillness that precedes major breaks in a person's path. When choices tilt between running from pain and running toward it, by nightfall, the temperature had dropped to the kind of cold that thins sound and sharpens breath. At 1927 on February 9th, her Saturn crashed into a snowbank along Route 112, an isolated stretch of road where tree silhouettes hold their shadows like secrets. A nearby resident heard the muted thud of metal meeting packed ice and stepped outside, finding Maura standing beside the car. The witness described her posture as dazed, though her composure remained almost unnervingly steady. She insisted she was fine. She refused offers to call the police. The witness saw no panic, no visible injury, only a young woman holding herself together as if any external involvement would fracture her completely. The cold pressed hard against the moment, wrapping it in a brittle quiet. Less than 7 minutes later, the first officer arrived. In those 7 minutes, the landscape remained unchanged. No passing cars, no recorded movement, only the still forest and the narrow road that cut through it like a blade. Yet Maura was gone. Not simply absent, vanished with the kind of abruptness that feels choreographed. There were no footprints leading into the woods, despite the soft snow that should have recorded every step. No trails of distress, no signs of a struggle, no blood. Her car was locked, a detail that contradicted any idea of a sudden flight into the night. Inside, several personal items were missing, but not all of them, creating a strange mosaic of intention and interruption. As officers expanded their searchlights across the roadside, several nearby residents watched from windows illuminated by the hush of rural suspicion. One house in particular became an early point of tension. Its owner resisted letting police search the property's perimeter, dismissing the request with a stiffness that felt disproportionate to the situation. The refusal seeded a quiet unease that would later grow into broader theories. A witness's account also faltered under scrutiny, changing twice in ways that pushed investigators into deeper uncertainty. What they had seen or believed they had seen shifted like vapor in a cold wind, each version scheming closer to ambiguity. In cases born of silence, altered memory becomes a kind of second crime scene. As officers combed the road, the woods, and the edges of driveways, technology offered no relief. A traffic camera positioned on a nearby route should have captured part of her journey or any vehicle that might have followed her. But on that exact night, at the exact window of time that mattered, it had been turned off for maintenance. The coincidence stretched thin against probability, settling into the investigation like a dark fingerprint. With each minute that passed, the timeline sharpened yet refused to reveal meaning. A young woman leaves campus under vague pretenses, receives a call no one can trace, drives into an isolated highway, crashes without injury, refuses assistance, and then disappears in a span shorter than the time needed to boil water. The sequence held a logic, but not one anchored in ordinary behavior. In the days and years that followed, investigators revisited that night repeatedly, scrutinizing every detail, every fleeting moment, as if the truth could be coaxed from the cold air and snow-laden roads. Yet at the junction where Route 112 meets the dark forest, the narrative splintered, revealing gaps no evidence could fully bridge. The forest swallowed sound, and the chill seemed to freeze time itself, leaving only questions lingering like a held breath. Footprints, tracks, and leads vanished as quickly as they appeared, and every witness statement, every minor clue seemed simultaneously meaningful and inadequate. What had truly occurred remained elusive. Was Maura's disappearance an act of spontaneous chaos, the culmination of personal impulse and circumstance? Or was it the product of deliberate design, a plan orchestrated in shadows, long before she ever reached that desolate stretch of highway, unseen and unanticipated by anyone around her? The investigation began beneath a sky the color of tarnished steel, the kind of sky that weighs down an entire landscape. Officers carved their way through the frozen woods, methodical but uneasy, knowing that time is a predator in cases like this. Their search grid extended 1 mile in every direction from the abandoned Saturn, forming a circle of effort that looked convincing on paper but left the forest's deeper secrets untouched. Search dogs traced Maura's scent with a sharp confidence at first, tugging along the snow-packed path toward a small creek. Then, without warning, the trail ended. It did not fade, it died cleanly, as if carved off by an unseen blade. That abrupt disappearance led some investigators to believe she entered a vehicle. Others argued the terrain confused the dogs, but the silence along the water's edge suggested something different, something colder. Despite hours of searching, no arrests followed. A handful of individuals were questioned, each carrying small inconsistencies that flickered like loose electrical wires. Still, none produced the kind of evidence investigators could anchor to. Certain leads were pushed aside quietly, dismissed with phrases like insufficient grounds or unlikely involvement, even though the shadows behind them never fully dissipated. Those early days held a tension between thoroughness and oversight. It was whispered that an entire section of forest across the creek had been neglected during the first sweep, a zone thick with old branches and the scent of stagnant water. By the time search teams returned, whatever story that soil once held had either been swallowed or scattered. While police fought through the physical silence of the woods, the digital world spun itself into a frenzy. The internet, that restless machine of speculation, seized the mystery like a flame touching dry leaves. Forums grew into labyrinths of theories, each thread branching into more intricate webs. Bloggers dissected time. Amateur sleuths mapped routes, measured distances, and compared shadows on photographs as if the forest itself might confess under sufficient scrutiny. Podcasts soon followed, each carrying a tone that hovered between curiosity and obsession. They treated the case as if it were an open wound the public could press fingers into. For Maura's family, the attention became both a spotlight and a blade. They were forced into a transparency few could withstand, compelled to reveal fragments of Maura's life never meant for strangers. Rumors twisted into accusations, innocent details warped under digital magnification until they looked sinister. Every misstep in the investigation became another fire for the internet to feed on, and every lack of evidence became a canvas for speculation. In the absence of truth, imagination became the loudest witness. Out of this storm rose three dominant theories, each a mirror reflecting a different version of who Maura might have been in her final hours. The first theorized a personal escape. According to this view, the pressures in Maura's life had tightened beyond tolerance. Academic strain, a relationship weighed by control and expectation, and quiet mistakes she feared were accumulating. Proponents of this theory believed she ran toward a clean slate, leaving her old life like a shed skin behind her. To them, the crash was merely an interruption on the road to reinvention. Yet the theory felt brittle. People fleeing their lives do not abandon safety in midwinter woods, and they do not vanish in the span of 7 minutes without leaving footprints in snow, softened by the day's last light. Still, the idea persisted, sustained by the human tendency to prefer a voluntary disappearance over a violent one. The second theory pointed toward a staged abduction. In this version, a stranger shadowed her journey, waiting for the precise moment when the crash isolated her. Route 112, with its blind curves and sparse traffic, offered the perfect stage. Supporters of this theory saw the silent crash site, the missing items, and the sudden end of the scent trail as pieces of a deliberate plan. They believed someone used the chaos of the accident to take her efficiently, quickly, and with an unnerving level of preparation. It was a theory steeped in darkness, yet it threaded itself neatly through the timeline, giving structure to what otherwise looked like chaos. The third theory was the most intimate and the most unsettling. It suggested a third party, someone neither stranger nor close family, someone who knew Maura in ways outsiders overlooked. The mysterious phone call became the centerpiece. Perhaps the caller was someone who understood her vulnerabilities, someone whose presence in her life had been underestimated. This theory implied betrayal from a familiar voice, one capable of guiding her into the night with trust, strong enough to override instinct. Each theory carried its own gravity, tugging the public in different directions. None could fully explain the scene, yet none could be entirely dismissed. They formed a triad of uncertainty, leaving the forest filled with whispers of what might have been. Ultimately, the question shifts from investigators to the viewer, settling uneasily like a cold draft along the spine. If you were retracing Maura's final steps, which narrative would you trust: the voluntary escape from mounting pressures, the calculated abduction by a stranger, or the quiet intervention of someone close, someone who knew her more deeply than anyone imagined? Each theory holds its own weight, seeming solid and plausible when considered in isolation, a suspended truth hovering in the mind, resisting resolution. Yet the case refuses to be contained by conjecture. Beneath the frozen winter landscape, an unexpected discovery awaited, one that neither confirmed nor fully contradicted any existing theory. Instead, it fractured each explanation, leaving the story more enigmatic than before. the threads of truth slipping through grasping fingers and embedding uncertainty into every retelling of that night. Because soon, a new finding emerged from the edge of that lonely road, something subtle and deeply unsettling, something that made every existing theory crumble in its own way, and forced investigators to rethink everything they believed about the night Maura was swallowed by the woods. In every unresolved disappearance, there is a psychological landscape more complex than the physical one. Beneath the timeline of events lies an undercurrent of pressure, fear, and instinct forces that shape decisions in ways not immediately visible. Maura's final hours appear calm on the surface, but beneath that veneer may have been a storm no one else could see. She was a young woman navigating expectations, mistakes, and internal fractures that rarely announced themselves aloud. The weight she carried did not need to be dramatic to be dangerous. Sometimes the quietest distress is the kind that drives people toward irreversible paths. Those who might have been involved, whether directly or indirectly, reveal another layer of psychology. A perpetrator, if one exists, may not fit the stereotypical image of a predator stalking the night. Instead, the individual could have been driven by subtle tensions, resentment, possessiveness, or a need to control someone whose independence threatened their own stability. Under stress, people can cross invisible thresholds without realizing they have stepped from irritation into obsession. And once that line is crossed, the consequences can ripple outward with chilling precision. From a Stoic perspective, the tragedy of this case lies in the universal truth that humans falter when emotions rule unchecked. Stoicism warns that chaos grows where clarity is lost, and when fear or anger guides choices, the mind becomes its own destabilizing force. Maura may have struggled with internal conflicts she tried to contain, and anyone who harmed her could have been equally entangled in their own emotional storm. In this view, the night she vanished was not an isolated event, but the culmination of pressures left unmanaged. Buddhist philosophy offers an even deeper lens. It teaches that karma is not a divine punishment, but a chain of cause and effect born from countless small actions. In a case like this, karma manifests in subtle ways. The overlooked signs, the ignored distress, the unspoken tensions, each contributes a thread to the final outcome. The disappearance becomes not merely a moment of violence or fear, but the result of fractures in relationships, choices made under pressure, and truths left unspoken for too long. Goop, here, is the echo of decisions, not a sentence handed down. Because the case remains unsolved, the search for truth demands new angles. One promising direction lies in retracing the mysterious 1-minute-34-second phone call before Maura left campus. It is a shot of the timeline too precise to dismiss, a sliver of contact that could redefine everything, identifying the caller's intent. Reassurance, fear, manipulation could shift the entire psychological profile of the final hours. Another overlooked path lies in examining the houses closest to the crash site. Some properties were never searched with the thoroughness later investigators believed necessary. In small towns, the proximity between homes conceals as much as it reveals. A window left unlit, a shed locked too quickly, a basement unusually warm in winter. Each detail could hold significance when viewed with fresh eyes. The resident's silence might not indicate guilt. Often, it is merely the language of fear, a cautious response to uncertainty, suspicion, or the unknown surrounding the event. Reevaluating the route Maura chose that evening might also uncover a deeper truth. Her claimed reason for leaving a family emergency had no foundation, and the direction in which she drove did not align with the destinations she mentioned to others. Her path spiraled into wooded isolation rather than toward hotels, relatives, or familiar comfort. Such a detour suggests intent shaped not by logic but by emotional urgency. Revisiting the geography of her last drive could illuminate patterns missed in the initial investigation. If this were a case with a clear ending, the aftermath would still leave scars deep enough to outlast generations. The community would wrestle with shaken trust, recognizing how fragile safety truly is. Society would be reminded that even well-lit towns and quiet roads harbor shadows long and dark. For Maura's family, The wound would remain open in ways the outside world rarely understands. Disappearance creates a unique form of grief, one without closure, without a grave, without the ability to say goodbye. It is a grief that repeats itself every morning, a cycle without release. And for those who shape the events of that night, intentionally or accidentally, the consequences would reverberate silently. People often believe crimes are defined by the moment they occur, but in reality, they continue to unfold through guilt, fear, or denial carried over years. The true end of a case is rarely when the file is closed. It is when the psychological echoes finally fade, if they ever do. The deeper question this case raises is not only what truly happened, but why silence continues to hold sway over the story. Silence can serve as a shield or a weapon, obscuring guilt or preserving innocence, revealing trauma or concealing complicity. In situations like Maura's disappearance, silence takes on a presence of its own, almost sentient, influencing the narrative as profoundly as any physical evidence. It lingers in the gaps between known facts, in the unanswered questions, and in the unseen spaces where events unfolded. Silence shapes perception, leaving truth both elusive and haunting, an ever-present force in the unfolding mystery. The final question lingers, persistent and cold, carried on the winter air, still drifting through the New Hampshire woods. If the truth is buried beneath layers of silence, can time ever be powerful enough to uncover it? Or will the forest guard its secrets indefinitely, long after everyone who remembers her has faded into the same quiet, leaving only memory and speculation behind? The answer exists somewhere between the fractured timeline, the missing footprints, and the 1-minute-30-4-second phone call that remains unexplained. It waits in the spaces where evidence is absent, in the gaps between what was seen and what was imagined, lying dormant until the moment when silence finally loosens its grip, allowing the truth, however partial or elusive, to step forward and reveal itself. Some stories do more than record a crime. They confront us with the quiet fears we try to ignore. The fear of losing someone without warning, the fear of unanswered spaces that stretch across years, and the fear that unseen figures can move beside us without ever revealing their intent. The disappearance of Maura Murray reminds us that every mystery leaves a trace, however faint, waiting for the patient eye to follow. In the end, what lingers is not the violence we imagine, but the silence that surrounds it. A silence that speaks more sharply than any confession could. If you wish to continue exploring the hidden corners of the human mind, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo long after the world stops listening. Thank you for joining Criminal